Morning, folks. I have 8 minutes until this tournament starts. I'm playing in a 45-minute aside Swiss tournament on Sunday, July 3rd. I think it's going to be a good time. No idea who I'm playing. I'm playing in the under 1400 section, which includes most of the players. I think there are three in the 1800 plus and one in the 1400 to 1799. So, playing up a section would have meant I played one guy who would beat me because he's rated 1750 or whatever. So, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'll get to play. I think there are about 9 players in my section, or at least there were last night. So hopefully it'll be good. It's in a place that I've never been before. It's in the Bay Area chess offices, which I had never seen. But it seems fine. It's in the middle of kind of an industrial center, so we'll see how it goes. Looks like there are several restaurants around here though, which hopefully will be good. Because I woke up like right before I drove here, and I haven't had any food or water or coffee or anything. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah, I think that's all I got. Not a whole lot interesting to say. It's the same as every time. All right, see you guys later.
All right, everybody. I hope you're doing well. First of all, obviously I've changed the setup here, so the board is a little bit bigger and my face is a little bit bigger. Unclear whether or not that really matters to y'all, but I realize that there's some wasted space, some stuff that makes sense on stream but doesn't really make sense in YouTube videos. So let me know if you like the new format or not. Anyways, the other notable addition that I have is that my roommate has a pop filter that he doesn't use, so hopefully some of the p sounds won't come through so loud. It's having a little bit of sound quality issues where if I get a little too close to my microphone, it's an issue, and now I don't think it should be. So this is round 1 of the Bay Area Chess Swiss on July 3rd. Just a local tournament played at the Bay Area Chess offices, which I hadn't been to before, but was a nice little, it was a small place in a little industrial complex. Pretty nice. My first opponent was Vivek Neelam, rated 955, a pretty young guy. He had white and I had black, and so, a fine way to start the day. I figured I was going to go black, white. Which is nice. That means that you sort of get to end the day with some chances to get back into it. Anyways, let's see how the game went. So my opponent played e4, and I haven't really figured out what I want to play against e4 yet, but I know that trying to play c5 has been rough because I don't know any of the theory, and maybe I'll become a Scandinavian player, but I don't know any of the themes yet. I just haven't taken some time to learn this opening that much as black. So I play e5 because I know most of the critical lines here. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, so we have a Ruy Lopez. And I play a6. I'm very comfortable in the positions where my opponent takes. I take back. If they try and take here, you can play queen d4. If your opponent goes back, you can take the pawn, obviously. So this is slightly better for black. My opponent doesn't do any of that, though. They play the standard bishop a4. And I play knight f6. Pretty normal stuff. My opponent castles. I play bishop e7. I'm not really sure where I want this bishop to go, but I know that in a lot of lines I end up playing d6, and having my bishop on the king side helps me not get mated, versus having my bishop on the queen side. A lot of times there end up being a lot of dark square weaknesses now that I've locked my bishop on the wrong side. My opponent plays knight c3. I castle. My opponent plays d3, and I play h6. And you can see that there are already some problems in this position. In particular, a move that I needed to insert before playing h6, I believe, is b5. And what that does is it moves the bishop off this diagonal. So now when I play something like h6, my opponent can't do what they did in the game. Now the idea of h6 is relatively obvious. I want to keep this pin from happening so that my knight is able to jump around. So this bishop can't come here, this knight can't come here. But not inserting the move b5 has a pretty obvious problem. h6. My opponent takes my knight, which is the only defender of this pawn. I play d takes, my opponent plays knight takes. And so now I'm just cleanly down a pawn. You'll see the computer says this is plus like 1.6 or so for my opponent. And I play bishop d6, which is fine. So now what I'm thinking is, okay, there's no pawn here, but I have a semi-open file. I need to get my bishops involved in the diagonals here. Well, it's a drunk bishop. But I need to get my bishops on these diagonals and start doing stuff on the king side. So my opponent plays knight c4. He doesn't want his knight to get taken, obviously. And I play bishop g4. And the thought here I had is exactly what happened in the game, which is my opponent plays f3, which weakens their king, which is something that I want. The computer doesn't love this, but I figured practically this is probably going to be okay at my level. And I played bishop c5 check. Now, you can't play d4, because then obviously pawn bishop takes, and I just got a pawn for free, because it's defended by the queen. Like, you can't play queen takes because queen takes. Like, that would obviously be crushing for black. So you just sort of have to move out of the way of this check on this, freshly opened diagonal. I suppose the other thing you can do is you can play bishop e3 here, but then takes. I retreat my bishop. As it's kind of like an awkward pawn structure. I guess it's gonna give my opponent pretty good play against my light square bishop. But I didn't think they were going to do that, and my opponent did not do that. My opponent played king h1, and that gives me time to retreat my bishop. But now this bishop isn't going to get taken. Basically, the problem that I had is when knight c4 was played, this bishop is under attack, and I The only advantage I have in the position is that I have the 2 bishops, so I wanted to preserve that advantage. So we move forward. I play bishop e6, and my opponent plays knight e3, defended by their bishop, obviously, so I can't do anything. They might want to play knight g4. They might want to play knight f5. Unclear. There are several different reasonable plans for them, but I think the other thing that they didn't want was, if they make some nothing move, takes. They didn't want to trade the queens in this circumstance, in particular because they can end up in a position where I control the only semi-open file, and you can see that this is only mildly better for white despite being a pawn up. Things are very symmetrical on the queen side. It's going to be hard for this knight to get into play, etc., etc. Anyways, my opponent plays knight e3, and I play knight h5. The thing that I'm thinking here is I want to get my queen to the h file, and then I want to make use of this check to be able to win the exchange. My opponent plays f4, and I'm thinking, okay, do I try and do something about that? Obviously, knight can't take because the rook takes here. But I could do something like retreat my bishop or try to get my bishop over here, except that's going to get taken by the queen. How do I... Basically, my opponent's trying to get this bishop out of the attack. And I was like, I'm not sure that I really can or have to do anything about that. So I just go ahead and play queen h4. My opponent plays f5, attacking this bishop, and as has happened several times in this game, I play an in-between move, knight g3 check. The pawn cannot take because the queen is pinning the pawn. So there's, one legal move here, king g1. And then I was debating, okay, is there anything I can do with this, or I can take here maybe, but this knight is protecting that. Are there any tactics that are along here? And I don't think there are. So I just went ahead and took the rook. My opponent played queen takes f1. You can't play knight takes because the knight is pinned. You could play king takes, but that drops this pawn. So my opponent plays queen takes, which is the only reasonable thing. And I play bishop d7, basically preserving my bishop. Again, I have the bishop pair. My opponent does not. And so now I'm up in exchange for a pawn. So things are actually pretty decent, but it's equalish. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. My opponent has this really strong bind on the center. I have 7 pawns, and I'm up in exchange. So fair enough. My opponent plays king h1. They'd like to be out of this pin so that their knight can do stuff. And I play bishop d6, now going for this checkmate. If my opponent makes a nothing move, checkmate. Wonderful. My opponent obviously does not do that. They can't play g3 because then I just take with the bishop. This pawn can't take because it's pinned, and I just won another free pawn. So the only move that they can play that makes any sense here is h3. Maybe not the only move, but the move that I certainly expected. I play queen g3. Again, you have to find some way to defend this square, and the only way to defend that square is to play queen g1. Which they do. And so then my thought was, okay, if I can get this bishop into the attack, it's going to be good. So I played g6. The computer does not like this move, and in this position, it wants me to retreat my queen. It says, look at how passive and open this king is. Let's get our queen in a position where it's not going to get kicked around or locked in there, and perhaps we can retreat and then play against some of these weaknesses. The other thing that I would like to be able to do is keep my queen around to be able to infiltrate, but I can't do that. Yet other possible moves are stuff like b5, taking stuff on the queen side, or queen g5, or a5, or rook fe8. It's got a bunch of other reasonable moves in that position. Nonetheless, I play g6 because I'd like to break this up. If I can get my bishop in, great. If takes, then this is good for me. Why is this good for me again? Because I can get my rook into the game. So obviously, taking is great for me. My opponent does not do that. They play f6, which gives them, I believe, a mild advantage. And I play bishop takes h3. And I'm trying to remember why this works for me. If they play pawn takes... I play check and mate. That's right. It's been a while since I played the game. It's been about a week. I try and get these things done a little bit earlier, but we don't always get there. So, seems like a free pawn to me. And my opponent responds correctly. Sorry, we went ahead a little bit there. With knight f1, whenever I go into variations, it tries to put me back at the next move rather than back to the previous move that I was looking at. I'm not clicking on the right places, is basically what I'm telling you. Anyways, my opponent plays knight f1. It's move your queen somewhere, and then I can take your bishop. So I do move my queen somewhere. My opponent takes with the pawn. I take queen h3. So now my opponent has 3 pieces and a rook. I have 1 piece and 2 rooks. So basically it's 2 pieces for a rook, but I've gotten some pawns in exchange for that. So this is basically zeros, I believe, because of perhaps a perpetual or something to this effect. Oh, well, that just gives up a queen, so obviously their queen has to go here, and then I can continue to perpetual check them, I think. Nonetheless, I take that pawn, queen h3 check, and my opponent plays knight h2, which is the better move here. And I play, I wasn't really sure what to do, but I wanted to round up this pawn. Obviously, we're going to end up in a position where our queens are probably going to end up traded, and I need to do something to resolve the center. So I play queen e5, and my opponent plays queen g2. So then my thought is, okay, do I want to like take the queen, takes with the king, and take this pawn? Or do I want to like liquidate all the material over here, have the king over here, and then be able to round up these pawns later? I think it's probably better to play queen takes. Let's look at the lines for a second. The best move here actually is just to back up, interestingly enough. But between the two things, taking the queen is slightly better than what I did, which I took the knight. So then I'm getting rid of my bishop, and so then it's just two rooks versus a rook and two pieces. And I have one extra pawn. So in theory, equal material, but we'll see. The nice thing, though, is my opponent has a knight and a bishop, so that's going to be very hard to mate me. Takes. And I play g5 because I'd like to be able to, well, several reasons. One, this pawn is going to be hanging. I think that's part of the problem that I had with trying to back up my queen is like, how do I defend this pawn? I don't have time to take this pawn. My opponent takes that pawn. They're threatening to like come in here and harass my rook. That actually informs a fair amount. Nonetheless, takes, bishop takes, king takes, and I play g5 to solve this problem. And again, to get my king forward and up into the game. My opponent plays bishop e3, and I think that goes wrong just a little bit. I think that there are better places to activate this bishop. d2, I think, might be a better square. There end up being some problems for my opponents in this position. I mean, they're clearly up, but it's non-trivial to play this correctly. The king is wide open, so even though we're in an end game, if I can get my rooks active, then great. So I play rook a8, which is fine. My opponent plays rook g1. I think let's take a look. So I make a nothing move. Bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes. Okay, that gives it most of their advantage. Unclear what maybe they wanted to be able to get into this square. Actually, that makes more sense. So I play here. They want to be able to go here. The pawn cannot take. They're going to come get this pawn. I've got to like do awkward stuff with my rook. And I said I don't really want any of that. So I just play king e7, breaking the pin. So now their bishop can't go there. Their bishop's obviously not going to be able to take, etc., etc. My opponent played e5. They want to be able to defend this pawn. So I played rook fe8, and this e5 is a mistake. This pawn's not really under threat, and so they're kind of solving a problem that they don't yet have, and they need to get. They're up two pieces for a rook, but this rook is doing stuff. And when I played rook fe8, this rook is also doing stuff. So I have two pieces that aren't really doing anything versus two rooks that are definitely doing stuff, and then a rook that's kind of misplaced. So my opponent plays d4, and actually the response here is pretty easy. Basically, I can't take this because the bishop takes, but what I can do is get this out of the way. So if pushes, obviously just take this pawn. And if takes, which is what happens in the game, I get to play rook takes e5. So either way, I just traded pawns, but now my opponent's got a 4-on-3 over here. This pawn is going to be rounded up, and I've got a 3-on-0 over here. So they're going to have to like play pretty skilledly in order to be able to defend this. My opponent played bishop f2, and I played rook d2, basically going, okay, your bishop's pinned. You have to come defend it somehow, and then I win another pawn. And surprisingly, it's actually in this position that my opponent resigned. I wasn't really expecting that at all, but they apparently were uncomfortable. I think maybe they thought they were losing the bishop, but either way, like this is slowly rolling out of control for them. I mean, how are they ever going to stop this 3-on-0 whenever I wrangle this pawn? You know? So it makes some sense. Obviously, the computer says like plus 3.4, but I felt, I was down by 2.4 earlier in this game. So to me, at least, this feels a little bit early to resign. But again, they're going to end up losing a couple pawns over here, and then I've got pawn majorities on both sides of the board. There's a reason this is winning for black, but I've screwed up a lot of things. All right, so the last thing worth taking note of is like what the game review score here is. And so my opponent played 72.8, I played 78.9, and I played a couple of great moves. If we take a look, one is this knight takes f1 move. It's the only good move. Was glad to be able to seen that correctly. And the other one is rook fe8, basically saying, okay, solve your problems in the middle of the board. Figure out what you're going to do. This basically punishes the blunder that is e5. So, a pretty decent game for me. Let's take a look at how the rating changes went. Okay, so after round one, we played an opponent rated 955, and we beat them. So that puts our tournament performance at 1355, and our new rating in theory would be 1145. Not worth really showing a graph here, but figured you guys would like to know. All right, folks, we're back in the car. Handheld cam.
First game, I was playing black against Vivek Neelam, who's rated 955. Nice kid, pretty young. And I lost a pawn straight out of the opening in a Ruy Lopez because I didn't want to play d6. So I lost a pawn, and then I was like, okay, let's get some initiative. And I managed to whip up a reasonably good attack. And then I got a little over my skis. I had to use the restroom in the middle of the game, and the games aren't super duper long. So that ended up costing me a fair amount of time. I ended the game with like 10 minutes on my clock, which in a 45-minute game is like not that unreasonable, but I started to feel the temperature a little bit. Anyways, we ended up in an ending that like the computer says is +5 for my opponent. And I knew that it wasn't. Basically, I was down pawn, and then I was up an exchange for a pawn, and then I was just cleanly up an exchange, and then I ended up. It was a rook and a piece for 2 pieces, so I had 2 rooks, and my opponent had a rook, a knight, and a bishop, but they like weren't particularly patient about dealing with the pawn majority that they had in the center of the board, and I was able to play some not so difficult tactics in order to be able to garner an advantage there. So that was fairly pleasant. So the game was +5, then it was even, then it was -5, and then the game was over. My opponent resigned, and I was a little bit confused about why they resigned at the point that they did. I thought that we could continue to play on, but turns out that they were like totally correct. And the game was definitely super unsound, but it was very interesting, which is what I want. It's kind of like it's like Jonathan Schreins, who I mentioned in another video. He has a bunch of gambits that he plays, and none of them are good objectively, but a lot of them are difficult to play against, and they're very interesting. And you get the initiative, which I was happy to sacrifice a pawn for the initiative, it turns out. So again, this tournament's straight after I had COVID, so it was tournament, COVID, another tournament now, so I haven't really had any time to like sit down and figure out any stuff. But I did order a book on the Smith Mora Gambit, which should be fun. Mayhem in the Mora, as recommended by Daniel Naroditsky. Anyways, I think this is my first ever win as black, if I'm recalling correctly. So that's pretty exciting. So that's good. It's gonna mean that for the rest of the day my games are gonna be harder. But that's okay, because we got a win with black. We're doing well. This is a positive one for us. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next game. It's going well.